Welcome to the most wonderful time of year, the happiest season of all, or so they sing. But what is it really to you? That's the question. It seems that every individual has their own take on this time of year, and generally, most of the consensus says that it's a Hallmark holiday where you give gifts and receive gifts in excess and eat an excess amount of food and drink for seemingly no reason other than that that's what people do at this time of year. Or is it because there's something deeper? Is there something more behind the rituals that we perform and the origins of the holiday in general that we're all kind of unconsciously participating in? Well, that's what we're going to find out, here in Sweden at least, from the Swedish perspective, looking at both the light and the dark, the modern and the traditional.
Beginning with the significance of December 13th, a date that seems innocuous to most in the holiday season. It's the juncture of Lucedagen, the honoring and celebration of Sankta Lucia, and Lussefärden, the ride of the night witch hag of the wild hunt, feared in the long dark of winter from the long dark past. These two are not to be mistaken for one another, for they are polar opposites, sharing similar names but with absolutely no connection. Lucia of Syracuse is sacred in Sweden today, despite Sweden being Protestant and separating themselves from other Catholic saints. Lucia's history and symbolic connection to lighting up the dark resonates in the heart of Swedish contemporary Christmas culture, despite having nothing originally to do with Christmas. That versus the torments of Lussefärden and her rides with undead hosts in tow to bring righteous havoc upon the ill-prepared and ill-protected from the depths of northern nights on the Ides of antiquity. In this video, we take you on a knowledgeable tour by both gallivanting around the modern Christmas experience this side of Scandinavia, meeting elves and the Tomte of Liseberg Park, and also focusing spiritually on living and learning the history of Lucy and her haunted hunt. We hope you enjoy our first video on this channel and leave a like or comment before subscribing. Let's lay down some Lucia foundation as we enter the illuminated portal to Liseberg Park. And remember to sightsee not just the aesthetics, but also the essence behind the display to better look through a Swedish lens as we peel back this holiday's layers. Before the switch to the Gregorian calendar, St. Lucia's celebration was ordained on December 13th, the darkest day of the year, according to the Julian calendar. While the desire to have St. Lucia light up this night is clear, her very name Lucia coming from the Latin word lux for light, it's important to know her relationship with darkness as well to enhance our understanding of her adoration and power in the Nordic Christian world. St. Lucia is the patron saint of the blind, and was known for traversing lightless catacombs by a candle crown so she could be free to help the hidden Christians of pagan Rome. According to the myth, the soldiers found her out and they publicly took her eyes as punishment. However, she spoke aloud during the torment, "I have obtained the reprieve of my martyrdom so that I may take away from believers the fear of suffering, and from unbelievers the voice of mockery." The executioner sunk a saber into her throat, but with unhalting speech she continued, prophesying before she finally fell that the death and downfall of the persecuting emperors of Rome would bring amity to the church. What history can only say for certain is that she was a charitable woman, condemned and put to the sword for her faith. But the potency and meaning of the tales that surround her over time are all traits that resonate with the peoples of the North, hence her appropriation, praise, and ritual embodiment, which only grows in popularity today. For a deep dive and thorough mapping of St. Lucia's place in Scandinavia via mythological comparisons of her martyrdom with Norse mythology, subscribe to the Gonzo Pilgrimage Substack for articles that go further than our videos. plus extra written works that wrestle with a wide array of subjects, both philosophical and spiritual. Now, about where we are and why.
So, Liseberg Park, second most visited amusement park here in Sweden. One of the top 10 in the world, and definitely one of the top 5 in Europe. Here, perhaps because it is in Sweden, there is a bit more soul and a bit more mythology behind everything. So let's take a look at that.
The most outstanding example of soul and myth starts here, and wandering the woods till we've straightened out what an elf actually is. In an American Christmas, elves help Santa Claus. But what about in Sweden, where elves have roamed as long as Odin and Loki have? Well, I hope your mind is blown rather than pretzeled. You see, in Sweden lives the Nissa, or the Tomte, a small being linked to households and animals on the property, and is often translated as gnome in English books because of their similar appearance. However, the Nissa Tomte is not a gnome, but a hard-working helper spirit who demands respect and food offerings, usually on the winter solstice. They are not to be confused with the beautiful but deadly Eilvor, nature spirits akin to fairies and nymphs. And they are not to be confused with the Olfar, the Ljósolfar or Svartolfar of Norse mythology. And we'll have to leave Tolkien's elves out entirely. So you see, elf terminology is a dazzling tangle of etymology, language drift, religious connotation, and pop culture. But the distinctions are important in this land. Christianization could not erase these beings for Swedes. Thus, after 300 to 400 years, we see the ancestral Nissa spirit continue its fastidiousness and midwinter activity in homes, villages, and workshops like this one here. This place was quite the shock to stumble upon, for we had no idea we would get access to the factory of the Nissa elves. And this is where we learned that Nissa elves make their presence for all Swedish peoples in Sweden, rather than at the frozen top of the world. But if Christmas elves are now homegrown, not of the North Pole, and known as the Nissa, and generally outside of the holiday season, Nissa and Tomte are interchangeable identifiers, where does that leave the Christmas time Tomte? Does Tomte describe the elves too? Well, I guess it's better to ask.
Hello.
I am here with an actual elf.
Nice to meet you guys.
Can you tell us what is a tomte versus an elf in Sweden?
The difference.
Yeah.
The difference is we work here in the workshop, and you know, Tomte is the Santa Claus.
Okay.
He's in the other side of the workshop.
How does it feel for you to kind of keep this tradition alive, this very particular Swedish sort of folklore?
It feels very good.
Yeah.
You know, it's not only a tradition. It's like it's a way of living. Coming together, everyone you know works very hard to keep this Christmas spirit up.
Yeah.
No other time of the year does this happen.
Yes.
You know, this is very beautiful part of the year. You can see the joy in people, and you can see the good part of humanity. So that's very beautiful, and that's what we elf works. We work on you know, keeping the planet whole, and it's one world.
Yeah.
We are sharing it. It's not. We are different countries and different language, but we're one world.
When Christmas was inevitably imported into a modernizing Sweden in the early 19th century, the term jultomten, or Christmas tomte, arrived with it, and is responsible for the aspect of Santa that accepts milk and cookies as an offering. So while our Nissa elf friend emphasized the ideals of the Enlightenment, universality, and progress, the tradition he survives is one of Swedish Romanticism, which puts folk tradition and authentic historical roots before blind assimilation of foreign Christmas descriptions that lacked meaningful underpinning for Sweden at that time. Liseberg Park is quite a blended spectacle. Monuments to all too familiar holiday decor, but ascending from the unique spiritual base of its people. Make no mistake, it is still an amusement park and can easily satisfy those seeking to splurge on superficial escapades. But credit where credit is due, there's more here than meets the eye. Nevertheless, questions begin to arise as December 13th looms and we reflect on the origins of the Tomte and Saint Lucia. Are all these histories, beings, and practices coincidental or connected? And what do they mean or matter in modern times? You see, places like Liseberg Park are emblematic of how the holidays are often approached around the world, erecting a tree, giving and getting stuff, and wrapping everything in strings of light, more so out of personal preference, social pressure, or yearly habit, rather than with the ritual purpose or ancient tradition that birthed these activities. These practices become less spiritual and less culturally specific, and more how Nietzsche described tradition, a higher authority which one obeys, not because it commands what is useful to us, but because it commands. Assuming the traditions and beings we discussed aren't existing for existence's sake, we can spot their utility and meaning by looking closer at December 13th as our clue. The previously longest night of the year, their common denominator, and both a sacred time and a fearsome nightmare. It is the night Sankta Lucia shines brightest, the night the Tomte was gifted grains, milk, and butter, and the night when the wild hunt raged on the aurora, shattered chimneys and hearths, and even stole living souls. Lucy, not Lucia, reigned supreme in our now dim memory of those eldest darks, and she led a legion from the lands of the afterlife.
Vildjakt, höladäng, Oscaraya, Divyayaga, Cachemorta, Cuesta de Animas. All different names for the wild hunt. It's an interesting phenomenon that peoples of Europe cannot seem to avoid. It comes up constantly, and not just in antiquity, but in modern times with stories and games like the Witcher series. In most traditions, the wild hunt is led by a ruthless man or an old figure touched with wisdom but savagery. The wild hunt is a danger and a threat. Often you wanted to avoid, appease somehow, or maybe some kind of bargaining was done. You gave offerings so as not to be swept up, never to be seen again, to join that retinue, to be taken by it to unknown lands and unknown places. In the Germanic world, there are quite a lot of interesting entities to be found, both in folklore, mythological tale, all over the place, really. But where does that fit into the wild hunt? Which entities are involved and which aren't? In the case of Lussefärden, that would be Lucy. Lucy is an older being that has interesting similarities to many different spirits and entities that you can find all throughout myth, legend, and local folklore. Is it good that in modern times, with less wintry uncertainty, came the transformation of ancient fears to festivals of light, from spirits roaming the sky, like Lucinata, to celebrations of Saint Lucia, for example. Is it humanity's attempt to reclaim the light, bring us out of the darkness and celebrate hope? Or is it a way for us to run from our own shadow? Does a celebration like Lussefärden allow for both the warmth in the community while accepting also the dark reality of those ancient fears, why they existed in the first place, and perhaps reveal why these things matter? To dive deeper into Lussefärden, I've been able to interview Vormas of the YouTube channel Araruno. Channel link is in the description. Unfortunately, due to some car trouble, I wasn't able to interview him in person. However, he did agree to answer my questions on camera and send me the footage for us to learn more about the traditional and spiritual truths of Lussefärden, as well as its cultural significance, both in history and now. So let's take a look. Vormas's credentials speak for themselves. He is steeped in the academic humanities and religious studies, having a master's degree in Viking and early medieval studies and a bachelor's degree in Nordic archaeology from Uppsala University. He's the author of several published works and a talented musician, diversely expressing his Norse-Germanic knowledge and spirituality across mediums. What draws you to host the Lussefärden Revival, and how did it come about?
When I investigated the old customs of around Yule time in Sweden, I discovered this around with the masked traditions around Lusse, which is December 13th. And I thought that this is something that is worth reviving. So that is what spawned my interest in beginning this tradition.
What does participating in Lussefärden mean to you, both spiritually and culturally?
Well, it is like a combination of the spiritual and cultural. For spirituality to feel meaningful, you need to give it a personal meaning. So Lussefärden for me is a combination of keeping the traditions alive and to give it a spiritual meaning, because it's not just like some sort of a Yule masquerade, it's something more than that. So it's about trying to embody the myth. You become the wild hunt. Lussefärden is a representation of the wild hunt in the mundane world. So we are becoming one with the ancestors of the wild hunt, to become one with the dead, so to speak, in the darkest time of the year, when the veil between the world of the living and the dead is the thinnest.
Would you say you focus more on the ritual aspect, the cultural heritage of it, the aesthetics and performative aspect, or a mix of all of the above?
I would say that it's a mixture of all. Of course, aesthetics is something important in the way that we as humans are triggered by what we see. It awakens different emotions within us, gives us different sensations. So, of course, the aesthetic part of it is of importance. But I would say that the main thing is a mixture of the cultural heritage and the spiritual meaning that lies behind everything, because when it comes to much of this sort of remnants from pre-Christian times, it's something more than just cultural heritage. There's something spiritual behind it, which may have changed during the centuries, but is still there and is something that drives the tradition underneath the surface in a way. And maybe a lot of modern people are not even aware of this, that it's like something subconscious that we need to reawaken in a way, give it a bit more deeper purpose in our otherwise quite superficial life that we live in these modern times.
Are there traditions better left in the past? How do you determine which practices to revive and which to leave behind completely?
I think we need to remember that we live in the 21st century and not, for example, in the Viking Age or in the Bronze Age. So it's more natural to go back through the folk traditions, which is the youngest leg, so to speak, of a continuous pre-Christian tradition. And yes, we can say that maybe it's not pre-Christian because it has been living parallel with Christianity and been influenced by Christianity, but when you look behind the surface, there is a lot of elements within the folk traditions that cannot be explained through a Christian lens only. Most important is that a tradition, if you want to revive a tradition, is that you need to put it into a context which makes sense for us in the time we live in today. Yes, maybe there are some things in the past that would be not so good to revive today, like human sacrifices, for example.
The winter holidays seem to balance opposites, playing with dualities of light and dark, cold and warmth, joy and fear, reward and punishment. What would you say to these splits, including the masculine and feminine leaders of the wild hunt, the human and the monstrous elements like Santa Claus and Krampus, and the physical and spiritual angles that seem integral to one another this time of year, such as the spirit of giving with the tradition of presents and the fear of physical death at the time the spirits of death ride?
When it comes to the masculine and feminine, when it comes to Odin and Lusse or Lussi, is that Lussi is, in my perspective, an aspect of Hel. Remember that the wild hunt is an army of the dead, and the ones who lead the dead, Odin or Hel, it makes sense, but that it should be something masculine or feminine per se, I don't think that that aspect is central to the wild hunt. It's more about the different entities who are leading the dead. So Odin is leading the dead Einherjar. Hel would be leading the Heljarsinnar from Helheimer or Hel, Death Realm. When it comes to the human and bestial Santa Claus versus Krampus, this is partially a Judeo-Christian concept when it comes to the good and the evil, and where Santa Claus is of course the good and Krampus is like the devil. While Krampus most likely have some pre-Christian roots in himself, it has been turned into something very Christian black and white. So I think Krampus has changed into a devilish figure. When it comes to the physical and spiritual, it's about the communion with the entities, with the dead spirits. I don't see it really as a split, because I see the communion as something natural in the spiritual context, that you give something to the land and to the spirits. So by Lussefärden we are giving offerings to the spirits of the lands that are associated with that specific place where we are doing it every year.
What is the difference that separates spirituality and escapism for you personally?
Revival of the tradition and to keep tradition alive is what is the main thing, to give life and the passings of the seasons and deeper context. I would not say that it's escapism at all. Well, the difference is you are giving it a deeper spiritual context. To dress up just like in a costume, it's just like a masquerade. Just because you dress up in a costume, it doesn't mean that you are spiritually understanding what you're supposed to do. And this is something more than just a masquerade or escapism in that sense.
Do you think this celebration and ritual could be controversial or seen as taboo?
The wild hunt itself is a representation of something out of the ordinary. It's something that in the past was respected by people and feared by people. Then to take part and becoming one with that is, of course, could be seen as a taboo in the mainstream society. Even in the past, people who were embodying the wild hunt in, for example, dressing up as lussegubbar in Lussefärden, or have the Perstenläufer who was following Persta and dressed up like Krampus, was seen as something a bit dangerous. So in that way it is of course a bit taboo, because it's about breaking the social norms and do things that is considered not socially acceptable. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to give hopefully some more information about this event and why I find it important, and thank you very much for interesting questions.
If you want to see the full interview with Vormas, comment down below and we'll post it separately for everyone interested. And if you appreciated listening to Vormas as much as we appreciated interviewing him, be sure to go to his YouTube channel, Alruno, and check out Seiðr of Death Productions for reading material, music, and merchandise you won't find anywhere else. Links are in the description below. If you're enjoying the video so far, then please consider buying us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com.
And if you want a mask like the stuff you've seen in the video, go to Urgrund Fundamentals on Instagram and drop me a message.
As promised at the beginning of the video, we've looked at the light and the dark, the modern and the traditional. So let us wander the wilderness a while as we sum up everything we've seen and heard, letting it sink in until some conclusions can be drawn, either for trivia or for the betterment of our own holiday traditions. When we stack up said holiday traditions, we are immediately confronted with their importance. And we recognize this importance via the feelings that we have and the experiences that we share with friends and family and strangers, in rituals and practices, habits and expectations that we've picked up either in the home or from school or from books and television and wherever else really. We see this phenomenon in Liseberg Park, and we confirmed it in our interview with the Nisse elf, who, when asked how it felt to keep Swedish folklore alive, responded that it felt good to participate in the Christmas tradition in the time of year that everyone works hard to keep alive and to enjoy. As heartwarming as that may be, it unfortunately doesn't satisfy our need to dive to the depths of understanding why these important rituals manifest the way they do. I think that modern holidays and modern events, modern ways that we approach the holidays are valuable, but valuable in the same way that IKEA instructions are valuable. It offers a route to traditions that matter and practices that are important to people. However, revivals like Lussefärden remind us why we do these traditions in the first place, and sort of bypass this need for hopscotch hedonism. It's about the power of remembrance, even in the most niche of practices, in undervalued and misunderstood traditions. All these traditions are like a tapestry where we can learn more about Saint Lucia, the Jultomten, the Wild Hunt, Lucy, and the winter solstice. Unyielding or not, unburnt or not, whether she took her own eyes or they were claimed by the Carnifex, Saint Lucia's fires hinder the old horrors, as her songs promise the radiance of a rosy sky at morning's arrival. So as not to overextend this expose, I will defer to our Gonzo Pilgrimage Substack yet again, where you can explore with us the links between Saint Lucia, Lucy, and, in an unexpected twist, Lucifer, while we lay down potential pagan pathways to explain Saint Lucia's popularity in the Nordic world today. Instead, we can shift focus to this wild rivalry Vormas described between the armies of the dead, beginning with Odin, Wotan, and Santa Claus. Santa Claus seems to be an amazing amalgamation. In some sense, truly the personification of winter in modern times. We have to consider why he is the way he is. Whether we think of it as lineage or evolution, for those who don't know, Santa Claus sits at the center of a great woven web of wintry wanderers and gods, not least notably Odin, inheriting a far less insidious skyward commute from him, replacing savage dogs and wild horses with Rudolph, and the army of the dead with a workforce of elves. It's also interesting how Santa is less associated with his connection with punishment. I mean, of course, everybody knows about getting the lump of coal in the stocking, sure. But it's not what you associate Saint Nick with. He's usually very giving and very fair as a figure. But he does have this punishing aspect. However, in other parts of the world and in other traditions, this is not united in one figure. We see a saint or a fatherly figure that gives gifts and is kind, and we see another, more sinister figure, the figure that keeps children in line, such as Krampus or Belschnickel or many others. So this creates an interesting paradigm that these two work together. It kind of shakes our foundation of good and evil a little bit, because how can good be good if it's teamed up with evil? When we describe the Wild Hunt, it's the same thing. An army of the dead riding and threatening people. We see that as something evil. Perhaps that is a mistake. It sort of separates us further from nature. A storm, a lightning storm, is not evil. A wildfire, although horrible and terrifying and intimidating, is not evil. Rather than good and evil, there seemed to be this pairing, this awareness of threat and reward that you often see in these older tales. That now being summed up in the idea of Santa Claus. Accepting this leads us to the tangled, unlikely alliance of Santa and Krampus, and how they relate to Odin and Lucy. Vormas is right. The masculine and the feminine are not central to the wild hunts as we understand them. But why are the wild hunts central to us? While both are spiritual in nature, there's an essential divide in their values, explaining why these two hunts are eternally in tension. If you want to be wealthy, gain something every day. If you want to be wise, take something away every day. In this way, I see a connection between the gifts that a Santa Claus or a Father Frost may give to those that are good in a mundane sense. They reward good behavior. They give you a material thing. Obviously, it has its place in time, in nature. And in those events, it's the figure of Swarthy Pete or Krampus that will then take something away from us, something material. Sometimes even take our life. And in this way, I see a connection with Lucy. That would explain why the aspects of chaos, like Lucy or Krampus, are resigned to the unknown cliffs and coppices and forlorn fens of the waking world, hidden in the primordial night of life, because often loss means suffering, especially at winter. What of those that join the hunt? What of those that give offerings unafraid? What of those that, when the hunt comes to take, we willfully sacrifice? What then? Well, it seems when we sacrifice what could otherwise be taken, we take steps towards the peace of the wise, and perhaps the wisdom we can gain from offering finite material things to the unknown in the dark is itself limitless. For more information on this, and for an interesting, in-depth look, I can highly recommend the book Abgrunja Bokis Tvai, an excerpt on trolls found on Alaruno, and the link to purchase in the description below. What I can say for sure is that Lussefärden brings together the light, the warmth, the community, but also acknowledges the dark reality of the unknown, of the winter season, of how humanity got this far to begin with. We can't forget what our ancestors went through in these long, dark, cold seasons. In this sense, revivals like Lussefärden help us remember our origins and participate in something greater than ourselves, something older than any single one of us. And it allows us the opportunity to unmask ourselves through ritual masking, discarding our ego and discarding our comfort and our safety, our sense of identity, and move into something more fundamental, something that allows us to leave behind the mundane self, focus on what truly matters for ourselves, the spirits, and society at large. In this way, we move into themes of cold and dark, death, fear, and the unknown. But we also move into humanity's response to these things, which always seems to be community, hope, light, and the renewal of the year to come. Thank you so much for watching our first video. We hope you enjoyed it. It was truly a labor of love and a massive undertaking. We appreciate all your support and are excited to bring you more boots on the ground reporting regarding the niches of spirituality and culture around the world. We must again shout out Vormas of Alaruno and Seiðr of Death. Without his efforts and vast knowledge, this video would likely not have been possible. Also, a sincere thank you to Urgrund Fundamentals for contributing photos, videos, and teaching me how to make my own leather mask. Follow Urgrund Fundamentals on Instagram and message them if you would like a handmade custom mask of your own for festivities, ritual use, or your own wild hunt.